The digital clock on the wall of every dorm room is ticking, its neon numbers glowing with a cold, uncaring precision. It is June 1st, 2026, and for the millions who have called this place home, the world is about to end. In less than 24 hours, 10 million worlds will simply cease to exist. This isn't just a metaphor. It is the literal erasure of thousands of terabytes of human history. As the final day begins, the digital sky starts to show the strain of a platform on life support. Vivid horizons that once hosted sunsets of orange and pink are now flickering with jagged artifacts and static. Avatars once vibrant and full of life stand in unusual silence, huddled in the corners of their favorite maps. Some are crying using built-in emotes, while others just stare at the horizon, waiting for the inevitable. The core mystery remains a painful question. Why would a titan of social gaming, a pioneer of the metaverse, pull the plug forever? The world was told it was a financial necessity, but those who lived there know the truth is much darker. The announcement of the closure didn't just break the internet, it broke the hearts of an entire generation. While the official corporate press releases spoke of sustainability and shifting market priorities, the hidden truth is far more complex and devastating. It wasn't just a matter of declining revenue or rising server costs. It was a series of fatal decisions made behind closed doors that slowly poisoned the platform from the inside out. There was a secret internal struggle between the original creators and the new corporate guard that doomed the platform long before the public countdown began. What nobody is talking about is how the very soul of the game was traded for short-term gains, leaving the community to pay the ultimate price with their memories. This isn't just a software application shutting down, it is the digital death of a million childhoods. These are spaces where people grew up, where they found solace from the harshness of the real world, and where they formed bonds that transcended physical distance. Before we continue into the heart of this collapse, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. If you've ever found a home in a digital world, you need to hear this story before the servers go dark, because preserving these histories is the only way to ensure they aren't lost to the void forever. To grasp why this hurts so much, you have to remember where it all began. Rec Room was never just another game. It was the friendly neighbor to the chaotic energy of VRChat and the massive corporate scale of Roblox. It occupied a special, sacred place in the digital frontier, balancing accessibility with a deep sense of creative empowerment. Everything started in the dorm room. To the uninitiated, it was just a small, orange-walled space with a bed, a dartboard, and a mirror. But to players, it was the portal to an infinite universe. It was the starting point for a global revolution in social interaction that bridged the gap between gaming and living. The accessibility factor was what truly set it apart from its competitors. Whether you were strapped into a high-end virtual reality headset or tapping on a basic smartphone during a long bus ride, you were treated as an equal member of the community. You could high-five a friend across the ocean, feel the weight of a digital basketball, or spend hours just talking in the lobby. This seamless integration of different technologies allowed Rec Room to become a true third place, a sanctuary that was neither work nor home, but a community where you could truly be yourself without judgment. It was a pioneer of the metaverse before the word became a corporate buzzword, focusing on the people rather than the profit. The simple, approachable graphics and friendly art style masked a sophisticated engine that allowed anyone to build something meaningful. It was a world built on the pure optimism of the mid-2010s, a time when the future of virtual reality felt bright and full of possibilities. The early years were defined by a sense of wonder, where every update brought new ways to connect. You could walk into the rec center and immediately be greeted by the sounds of laughter and the sight of people from every corner of the globe sharing a single space. This was the golden age, where the orange walls of the dorm room represented a promise of a digital future where everyone belonged. The weight of this history is what makes the current silence so deafening. Every trophy on the shelf of a player's dorm represents a mountain climbed, a quest completed, or a friendship forged in the heat of a paintball match. These are not just pixels. They are the artifacts of a decade spent building a new kind of society. The digital sky continues to fade, a reminder that even the most vibrant worlds are fragile when they are owned by those who only see numbers on a screen. The heart of this creative explosion was a single, unassuming tool held in the virtual hand of every player, the Maker Pen. To an outsider, It looked like a bulky orange plastic device, but to the architects of this digital realm, it was a conduit for pure imagination. Unlike other platforms that required complex coding or external software, the Maker Pen allowed a child in their bedroom or an artist in their studio to reach out and pull shapes from thin air. You didn't just build a house, you felt the geometry snap into place. You didn't just design a game, you lived inside the mechanics as you wired them together with glowing green circuits and logic chips. This tactile, immediate sense of creation gave the community a unique sense of ownership. Every room you walked into wasn't just a level designed by a corporate team, it was a manifestation of someone's dreams, meticulously shaped point by point, color by color. The culture that blossomed around this tool was one of radical generosity, where creators would spend hundreds of hours building elaborate puzzles or sprawling cities just for the joy of seeing others experience them. This accessibility created a culture that sat perfectly between the chaotic, often overwhelming sandbox of Roblox and the wild, unmoderated frontiers of VRChat. While Roblox often felt like a massive marketplace of disparate games and VRChat felt like a surreal, sometimes intimidating social experiment, Rec Room felt like a community center. It had rules, it had a structure, but it also had a soul that felt intensely personal. There was a warmth to the low-poly aesthetic that didn't demand high-end hardware, but did demand high-end human connection. It was a space where the technology disappeared behind the interactions. When you handed a friend a cup of virtual coffee in a custom cafe, or high-fived to join a party for a quest, the hardware on your face or the phone in your hand became invisible. This was the ultimate implementation of the third place. Sociologists often speak of the importance of a space that is neither home nor work, a neutral ground where people can gather, socialize, and exist without the pressures of daily life. For millions, this digital frontier became that sanctuary. It was where they went after school to vent about their day, where they met up with friends who lived thousands of miles away, and where they felt more like themselves than they ever did in physical reality. The personal stories born in these spaces are what truly define the legacy of the platform. Think of the long-distance friendships that turned into lifelong bonds. There are people who met in a frantic game of paintball 8 years ago and eventually traveled across oceans to meet in the real world. There are creative collectives that started as a group of strangers in a quest for the Golden Trophy lobby and grew into professional design studios. These aren't just anecdotes. They are the foundation of a shared history. You could find rooms dedicated to support groups, libraries filled with user-written books, and replicas of childhood homes created by people who had lost their physical ones. The platform became a massive living archive of the human experience, captured in three-dimensional space. Looking back at the era between 2016 and 2020, there was a palpable sense of optimism. It was a time when the idea of a metaverse didn't feel like a corporate buzzword designed to sell virtual real estate, but like a genuine promise of a more connected future. Players remember the first time they used a fly chip in a custom room, the exhilaration of soaring over a landscape they had helped build with their friends. There was a lightness to the experience, a feeling that as long as you had a friend by your side and a Maker Pen in your hand, you could build anything. This freedom was the heartbeat of the community. This wasn't just software, it was a container for human memories. Every room was a ghost of a conversation, every object a relic of a shared laugh, and every custom-built world a testament to the time people spent together. It was a place where you could be a hero in a fantasy world, or a kid playing dodgeball in a gym, and both felt equally real. As the sun began to set on this golden age, the community didn't realize they were standing on the edge of a cliff, clutching onto memories that were about to be deleted forever. The vibrancy of that digital spring did not fade gradually. It was severed with the clinical precision of a corporate guillotine. It happened on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, with thousands of players worldwide logging into their dorm rooms, reaching for their virtual coffee mugs, and checking their message boards for the day's events. But the usual notifications about new featured rooms or weekend challenges were replaced by a single pinned announcement that felt heavier than the plastic hardware strapped to their faces. The official blog post appeared at exactly 10 in the morning, a stark white page filled with the sterile, unfeeling language of corporate death. The music in the background of the platform seemed to lose its upbeat tempo, replaced in the minds of the players by a low, somber drone that would not stop. The announcement used words that were carefully chosen to sound professional while masking the magnitude of the tragedy. They spoke of things being unsustainable in the current market. They used terms like restructuring and strategic realignment to soften the blow. They talked about the finality of the decision with a coldness that ignored the 10 million worlds currently humming on their servers. To the corporate entity known as the Titan, this was a line item on a balance sheet that no longer made sense in the quarterly report. To the community, it was a death sentence for their shared history. The date was set in stone, June 1st, 2026. On that day, the lights would go out forever. The databases would be wiped clean. Every pixel, every friendship-formed statue, and every secret clubhouse would vanish into the void of unallocated memory. As the news rippled through the servers, a strange phenomenon occurred in the rec center. Normally, this social hub was a chaotic symphony of noise. The squeak of sneakers on the basketball court, the frantic chatter of groups organizing a quest, and the occasional blast of a confetti gun. But as the notification reached more and more headsets, the sound began to die. It was not a sudden silence, but a slow, agonizing realization that traveled from player to player like a cold front. Avatars stopped moving mid-stride. Some sat down on the digital floor, staring at the ceiling as if waiting for the sky to glitch and fall. Others gathered in small circles, not to play, but to whisper in voices that sounded uncharacteristically small. The high fives were gone. The vibrancy was replaced by a collective shock that made the bright, colorful world feel like a funeral parlor draped in neon. For the digital creators, those who had spent years mastering the complexities of the Maker Pen, the news was more than just the loss of a favorite game. It was a digital eviction from their own life's work. Imagine spending 10,000 hours building a Gothic cathedral, logic-gated to play a custom symphony when the virtual sun sets, only to be told the land beneath it is being demolished for a project you were never part of. These creators watched the announcement with a sense of betrayal that cut deeper than any software bug. They had been the ones to provide the content that kept the platform alive during its leanest years. They were the architects of the metaverse, the people who had turned a simple social app into a sprawling universe of infinite possibilities. Now they were being told that their labor of love was an unsustainable burden on the corporate ledger. The tone of the community shifted from confusion to a profound shared grief. This was not just a piece of software reaching its end-of-life cycle. It was the systematic destruction of a culture. In the hours following the post, the ghost town effect began to manifest prematurely. People were not leaving because they were finished. They were staying because they did not know how to say goodbye to a world that was still technically there, yet already felt like a memory. The corporate management, the Titan, remained silent after the initial post, offering no further explanation or comfort to those who had built their lives within those orange walls. They had given their notice, and in their eyes, the story was already over. But for the players, the announcement was only the first crack in the dam. As they pored over the corporate jargon, trying to find some glimmer of hope or a path toward a community buyout, the reality began to sink in. The friendly neighbor they had trusted for a decade was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating machine that saw their memories as mere data points to be purged. Every time a player spawned in, they were greeted not by the promise of adventure, but by the looming shadow of the deadline. However, as the initial shock began to crystallize into investigation, a darker truth began to emerge. The announcement had not come out of nowhere. The rot had not started on that cold Tuesday morning. It had been festering in the dark for years, hidden behind the bright colors and the aggressive monetization of the tokens era. The iceberg was massive, and the blog post was merely the tip that had finally broken the surface. To understand the depth of the betrayal, one must look back at the timeline of the collapse, tracing the invisible fractures that began to spiderweb across the digital landscape long before the first public announcement. The rot did not start with a single failure, but with a series of calculated, cold-blooded shifts in priority that prioritized the balance sheet over the heartbeat of the community. In 2023, the first true cracks appeared in the foundation. This was the year of the Great Transition, where the Titan began to shed its identity as a social pioneer and donned the armor of a ruthless corporate entity. Massive layoffs decimated the teams that had been the primary bridge between the developers and the players. These were the people who understood the culture, the ones who had spent their nights in the rec center listening to feedback and fixing the small glitches that made the world feel lived in. When they were gone, the platform lost its soul, and the vacuum was immediately filled by the aggressive monetization of the tokens era. Suddenly, the currency that had once been a fun reward for playing paintball or completing a quest became a mandatory requirement for any sense of progress or personalization. The economy became predatory, with every new feature designed to extract value from a community that had already given its time and creativity for free. By 2024, the platform was in the throes of a devastating identity crisis. The Titan, desperate to chase the massive user numbers of mobile gaming giants, initiated a pivot that would ultimately alienate its most loyal supporters. The focus shifted almost exclusively to the mobile experience, attempting to cram a complex, physics-based social virtual reality world into the palm of a hand. To make this work, the very things that made the platform special had to be sacrificed. The intricate interactions, the sense of depth, and the tactile nature of the Maker Pen were all optimized until they were unrecognizable. For the VR core, the pioneers who had built the world from its first orange blocks, it felt like being evicted from a custom-built home and forced into a sterile one-bedroom apartment. The interface became cluttered with buttons designed for touchscreens, and the immersion that had once made a simple game of dodgeball feel like a real-world memory was replaced by the flat, unresponsive clicking of glass. The management was chasing a new audience that had no loyalty to the history of the world, while simultaneously pushing the founders toward the exit. The year 2025 brought with it the Great Silence, a period where the vibrant update cycles of the past were replaced by months of stagnant air. This was the era of the ghost town effect. You could walk through the once crowded plazas and find only the echoes of your own footsteps. The popular rooms, once teeming with thousands of creators and explorers, became silent monuments to a fading era. Bug reports and community pleas were met with automated responses or total silence from the Titan. The creators, those digital creators who had invested 10,000 hours into their worlds, began to see the writing on the wall. They noticed the lack of maintenance, the crumbling infrastructure, and the way the servers seemed to struggle under the weight of their own neglect. The sense of optimism that had defined the early years was gone, replaced by a lingering dread that the lights were being turned off one room at a time, even if the power was still technically on. In the final quarter of the platform's life, the internal struggle reached a fever pitch. Behind closed doors, the Titan was grappling with a sudden and catastrophic spike in server costs. The infrastructure that held 10 million worlds together was becoming an unbearable financial burden for a company that had failed to turn its monetization schemes into sustainable profit. There were desperate, hushed negotiations for a buyout, with names like Snap Inc. whispered in the halls of the virtual world. For a moment, there was a hope that a new owner would see the value in the human connections and the massive library of user-generated content, perhaps repurposing the assets for high-end augmented reality filters or a new social frontier, but the negotiations were a failure. The technical debt was too high, and the engagement numbers were plummeting as the ghost town effect took hold. The Titan decided it was cheaper to burn the library than to pay for the storage. Each month was a step closer to the edge, but players were kept in the dark until it was too late. The weight of the impending blackout transformed the digital air into something thick and suffocating. For the elite tier of digital creators, the announcement felt less like a business decision and more like a targeted execution of their life's work. These were the master architects who had transcended the simple tools of the Maker Pen to build sprawling civilizations and intricate puzzles. They had spent 10,000 hours, entire years of their youth, meticulously placing every digital brick and tuning every line of circuit logic. To them, the deletion of the servers was a total erasure of their professional identity. For many members of the partner program, the loss was also terrifyingly practical. They had treated the platform as a career, earning a legitimate income through the tokens exchanged in their custom-built worlds. When the Titan decided to pull the plug, it effectively bankrupted these creators overnight. They weren't just losing a digital amusement or a simple game, they were losing the ability to pay their real-world bills. Watching as the digital storefronts they had cultivated with sweat and ingenuity were marked for total demolition. The term digital eviction began to echo through the halls of the rec center, but even that failed to capture the visceral cruelty of the situation. It was akin to watching your childhood home being torn down while your furniture was still inside, while the echoes of your laughter still vibrated in the floorboards. You could see the rafters, you could touch the walls, but you knew that in a few short hours, the very concept of here would cease to exist. This wasn't like a physical move where you could pack a box and take your history with you. In the metaverse, when the server dies, the space itself vanishes. There is no basement to store the relics, no attic for the old photos. There is only the absolute uncaring void where a home once stood. For a specific subset of the community, the Ghost Town players who remained until the bitter end, the impact was profoundly personal. Among them were individuals with severe physical disabilities or life-altering social anxiety. For these souls, the platform had been a miraculous equalizer. In the digital frontier, a person who was bedridden in the physical world could fly through the clouds of a fantasy realm. Someone who found eye contact impossible in a grocery store could lead a team to victory in a complex quest. The Rec Room was their primary connection to the human race, a third place that offered a dignity and a social life that the physical world often denied them. To these players, the shutdown was the equivalent of the only bridge to the outside world being detonated. They weren't just losing a game, they were being returned to a solitary confinement they had spent a decade trying to escape. The grief was palpable in the way their avatars moved, heavy, slumped, and aimless. As the final hours approached, a last chance atmosphere took hold of the remaining hubs. The rec center became a somber gathering ground for final vigils. Thousands of players stood in silence or spoke in hushed tones, taking endless streams of screenshots and recordings. They were trying to bottle the lightning, to capture a 360-degree memory of a place they would never stand in again. They exchanged Discord tags and social media handles with a frantic urgency, a desperate attempt to salvage the human connections before the infrastructure that supported them dissolved into static. The air of a funeral hung over every lobby, but it was a funeral for a world that was still flickering with life. Then came the most haunting visual of all, the countdown. The Titan had implemented a universal timer that appeared in the HUD of every single player and on the digital horizon of every world. The numbers were large, glowing red digits that ticked downward with a mechanical, rhythmic cruelty. 10 hours, 9 hours, 8... The clock didn't care about the masterpieces being deleted or the friendships being severed. It only cared about the zero. It was a constant, looming reminder of the end, casting a crimson glow over the avatars as they hugged for the last time. Every second that passed was a second closer to the digital abyss, a final, unyielding march toward the moment the light would finally go out on 10 million worlds. The final sunset was not merely a metaphorical closing. It was a literal, synchronized event across every single shard of the Rec Room universe. In those dying hours, the community staged a final defiance of joy, a desperate attempt to prove that the spirit of the place could not be extinguished by a corporate balance sheet. In the Golden Trophy and Jumbotron maps, veteran players organized massive, grueling quest marathons that spanned hours. They didn't play to beat high scores or set new world records. They walked through the halls together, their plastic-looking hands brushing against the low polygon walls as if trying to memorize the texture of the code. They moved in silence, a funeral procession through the digital dungeons they had conquered 1,000 times before. In the custom-built theaters that had once hosted weekly comedy nights and drama clubs, talent shows were held where the only prize was a shared moment of recognition. Players stood on stages, their voices cracking through the proximity chat as they thanked their friends for being their family when their real-world lives had been cold or lonely. It was a funeral where the deceased was still speaking, a collective goodbye to a friend you could never take with you into the physical world. As the sky in the rec center began to pulse with an unnatural, rhythmic strobe, a sign that the host servers were already being decommissioned in clusters, the final sunset reached its peak. The lighting engines failed to calculate the position of the digital sun, leaving the world in a perpetual, glitching twilight. Even in this flickering darkness, the community refused to log off. The talent shows turned into somber recitals of poetry and shared memories, where the silence between performers was filled only with the sound of quiet sobbing filtered through 1,000 different headsets around the globe. It was a profoundly heartbreaking and surreal sight. Avatars that had once danced and jumped now stood motionless, staring at the red countdown clock that dominated the horizon. They were mourning a version of themselves that only existed within these lines of code, an identity that was about to be permanently deleted. Beyond the emotional toll, the business autopsy revealed a structural rot that no amount of community love could fix. To understand why the Titan had finally decided to pull the plug, one had to look at the cold, jagged reality of the platform's finances. The technological engine debt was not just a technical hurdle, it was a financial anchor, built on an older version of Unity and designed for the constraints of 2016-era VR hardware. Rec Room had become a legacy system in a world moving toward high-fidelity realism. Every new feature added was like trying to bolt a jet engine onto a wooden carriage. It made the platform unstable and increasingly expensive to update. The high cost of server hosting for 10 million worlds, many of which were abandoned ghost town relics, created a massive deficit. Every month, the Titan was bleeding cash to maintain a digital museum that the tokens era had failed to make profitable. By trying to monetize the air itself, the Titan had driven away the very digital creators who provided the platform's value. This management trap, the pursuit of infinite growth at the expense of the community's health, ensured that the end was inevitable. The pivot toward mobile users, intended to capture a massive new market, had backfired by alienating the VR core that had built the platform's reputation. As the final precious minutes bled away, the rumors regarding Snap Inc. began to feel like a warning bell. Reports circulated that the intellectual property was being harvested and stripped down for basic AR filters rather than a gaming platform. The idea that a decade of human connection was being sold for parts, its soul discarded so its skin could be used for social media vanity, was the ultimate and final betrayal. It cast a shadow over the future of the open metaverse. If a pioneer like Rec Room could be dismantled so coldly, it suggested that the era of the digital frontier was over, replaced by a world where our digital memories are just assets to be liquidated by the highest and cold corporate bidder in an increasingly fractured and dying global marketplace. The question that lingers in the cooling air of the server rooms isn't just about the death of a single platform, but whether this is the first domino in a much larger, more catastrophic collapse of the virtual reality industry as a whole. For years, the promise of the metaverse was sold as an inevitable evolution of human interaction, a persistent digital frontier where the boundaries of physical reality would dissolve. But as the lights flicker out across the Rec Room universe, that dream feels increasingly like a mirage chased by overambitious venture capitalists. If a titan with 10 million worlds and a decade of established culture cannot survive the transition from a niche hobby to a sustainable business, what hope remains for the smaller, independent platform struggling in its shadow? This localized failure might be the harbinger of a digital dark age, where the vibrant user-generated spaces of the early 2020s are replaced by walled gardens and sanitized corporate showrooms that lack the soul of the dorm room and the chaotic joy of a community-run paintball match. We are witnessing the end of an era of digital innocence, where the tools of creation are being reclaimed by the hands of those who only see them as data points and engagement metrics. The rumored involvement of Snap Inc. only deepens this sense of loss. It suggests a future where our digital heritage is not preserved as history, but recycled as fleeting, disposable assets for social media vanity. Yet, even as the walls of this world crumble, the history of what was built here deserves to be more than a footnote in a corporate bankruptcy filing. To the digital creators who spent years sculpting landscapes out of thin air, and to the players who found their voice in a world that didn't care about their physical limitations, your stories are the only parts of the code that truly matter. If you have ever found a home in a digital world, if you have ever felt the genuine warmth of a virtual handshake, or the thrill of a shared victory in a quest map, you understand why we must document these histories before they vanish. We invite you to join our community to help us preserve the legacy of these digital pioneers so that the lessons learned within these orange walls are not forgotten. The Titan may have pulled the plug, but the collective memory of the Rec Room community remains a testament to what we can achieve when we are given the freedom to build our own reality. What was your favorite Rec Room memory? Which room felt most like home? Share your stories in the comments below and let us save them here, etched in text, where no server shutdown can ever reach them. Let this be our digital monument to a world that deserved better than to be sold for parts. A place where our collective voices can keep the spark of this community alive long after the electricity has stopped flowing to the server. The final hour has arrived. In the rec center, the glowing red numbers of the countdown clock have become a rhythmic pulse, echoing the heartbeat of a dying world. The sky is no longer a sky. It is a shattered mosaic of textures and error codes, a kaleidoscope of broken dreams. Avatars stand shoulder to shoulder, their plastic hands locked in a final embrace. There is no more talk of tokens or monetization. There is only the heavy, quiet dignity of a community saying goodbye to itself. One by one, the distant lights of the user-created worlds begin to blink out, plunging the horizon into a cold, absolute darkness. The dorm room, the place where every journey began, stands empty for the first time, its shelves bare, and its windows looking out onto a void that was once filled with the infinite potential of a million user-created stars. The posters on the walls are now nothing but gray rectangles, losing their data as the system prepares for the final end. The clock hits 10 seconds. A wave of static begins to wash over the remaining players, their forms flickering as the server connections are severed at the root. 9, 8, 7. The sounds of the world begin to distort, turning into a low, mournful drone. 6, 5, 4. A single, lingering note of the Rec Room theme music begins to play, a haunting acoustic melody that sounds like a lullaby for a digital ghost. 3, 2, 1. The screen erupts into a violent flash of white static, a blinding surge of energy as the final bits of data are purged from the memory banks forever. Then there is only black, a pure, heavy, and total silence. The worlds are gone. The maps are deleted and the avatars are erased, but the friendships were real, the love was real. We didn't just play a game, we lived in it. And that is something no server shutdown can ever truly delete. The static fades, leaving only the darkness and the echo of a place that once felt like home.